Adam. Oh, I see. All right, we are live. Come on in the room, Facebook family. How y'all doing?
Hello, everyone.
All right, we have Black Men's Exchange Nationals, another one of our live streams. We do this every 2 weeks, every second and fourth Friday at 7 p.m., where we discuss various topics that are relevant to Black people to get you to critically think about the world around you and to assess things from a pro-Black narrative. Now, today we will be discussing Black entanglements, the agenda to, I believe it's co-op, slander, and derail Black liberation. I'm Kashama Sankofa. We have Dr. Cleo Monago, who is the founder of Black Men's Exchange. We have Duke the Root, a world-renowned poet who also works with Black Men's Exchange. And we also have our brother Nathaniel, who is represented by that beautiful Black Power fist. He's one of our student interns and outreach workers or coordinators, whatever you want to call them. But anyway, we're excited to have y'all here. How y'all brothers doing?
I think there might be some sisters out there too, but you're talking to us, right?
I'm talking to y'all. Yeah. I already spoke to the Facebook family. That covers everybody.
Okay.
Brothers, sisters, and others.
I was slightly distracted, but I'm good. How about you? How about y'all?
I'm well. Just dealing with this right now. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm looking for the interface to make sure that I see what the heck is going on. Okay, well.
I believe that Kashama had some news or update about the Breonna Taylor situation.
Well, yeah, I do. But what was you about to say, Cleo?
I was just going to reiterate that, as you said, Kashama, we do this every 2 weeks. And because of COVID-19, we're doing this online as opposed to in a public forum in person, like as we've done for many years. We have community forums every week at the Wasi Center in different parts of the country on a bi-weekly basis. And we're doing it online because of COVID, making it being very limited in terms of face-to-face contact, social distancing mandates, etc. But what we usually do, which we didn't do before, but I want us to start doing it again, and maybe this is how you can bring in the issue that you were going to bring up with Breonna. Kashama, just ask the group how their week was, and is there anything they can think of that we might find interesting to talk about real quick before we get into our center topics. Anything that you can think of that has occurred?
Well, yeah, of course. We're about to get into some of our current events. One of the main things going down is tomorrow, actually. There are thousands of Black militants will be expected to descend upon Louisville, Kentucky, to actually do an armed demonstration in response to Breonna Taylor's murder. They are demanding an arrest of her murderers, the cops who stormed in her home and killed her. I believe everybody should be familiar with the story. But what I think a lot of people don't know is that they've been arresting protesters and throwing felonies at them like hotcakes. They even got your girl Portia down there from Real Housewives. I think she's looking at 5 years. So they're not slow to arrest protesters. And it's interesting that the cops are now claiming that they, want to cooperate with protesters, and they're shutting down certain streets and certain roads and bending over backwards to try to make it appear as if, we're going to let these armed protesters come in and do their thing and we're all, we're cooperating. But in reality, I take this as a sign of that this is the only thing they respond to. And that's what they're showing me. When Portia comes down and you throw her in jail and have her looking at 5 years, but as soon as some brothers talk about bringing some AK-47s down there and it's all good, we'll block streets off for you. I think that shows us a lot about where we are in this country. What y'all think?
I was just going to ask, who is Portia again? Portia is who?
She's a reality show.
TV show.
Character.
What show was that?
One of the Real Housewives show. I think Atlanta. Atlanta. That's the Black one.
Oh, the Housewives of Atlanta. Okay, I haven't seen that but once.
you did that just so you can.
Okay, I thought I heard. Okay.
So I this is my first time hearing about the group, but I looked it up while you were talking. Apparently it is a coalition called NFAC, which stands for quote unquote not fucking around coalition. And that is those are the individuals marching down to Louisville, Kentucky. What I think is interesting, and maybe there's time to talk about it, but I know that some of the entanglements that I see on social media is this idea that Black men particularly don't show up for Black women. And this is an interesting development here because I see lots of Black men, and I don't know who leads this organization, but I see lots of Black men here, as well as multiple instances of Black men protecting and standing up for Black women in cases of racial violence. Like, have y'all heard about a brother who had to sit on the porch for a Black woman? I forget exactly where this was, but because her neighbor was sending her threats and threatening her about her race and whatnot. And so this one brother sat on the porch, and then it inspired a coalition of brothers and later on sisters to also sit and take shifts sitting on the porch. And the cops were refusing to engage with the neighbor who was threatening them because they said that there was no proof of violence or harassment or intention to harm, rather. But as soon as the brothers and sisters started sitting out on that porch, the cops also started doing nightly shifts. So I just thought it was interesting, like, in a way that how narratives in our community go about how certain community members aren't protecting others, but there's case and example after example of here we are.
I actually spoke with that brother a couple of days ago. That was in New York. And
Okay.
the story goes deeper, Duke, because the cops, it wasn't as simple as there was no harm. They actually had like proof that they were submitting to the cops, recording this man harassing them. He had thrown human feces in the woman's yard and everything.
Mhm.
Yeah. But it turns out that this man is actually, or he used to work for the cops, or his son used to work for him, or something like that. But he's clicked in with the cops as well. And so this was a case where the cops were actually on this man's side and wasn't just, taking a neutral or a backseat to it. And that brother is actually, he's not even that young. He was like 51 years old, and he's not a part of any type of organization, never decided to join anything pro-Black or nothing. He was sitting up in his living room, and he saw it online that was happening. And he realized that wasn't too far from him, and he just got up and went.
Well, it's been interesting being alive as long as I have and watching how society operates and how urban legend is mistaken for fact. In this instance, what comes to mind is mentioning that somebody said that Black men don't show up for Black women. Well, you just gave some instances, Duke, of that being not true. But I'm going to tell you, throughout my life, I've always seen Black men show up for Black women. What a lot of us don't realize is that what is occurring on TV is a vetted, agenda-laden landscape of what people want people to think. It's not necessarily a representative of reality. And there's Black men showing up for Black women all over this country. Now, of course, there's Black men who are not showing up for Black women. There's some Black women not showing up for Black men. There's all kinds of things actually occurring. But what's important to underscore regarding what you just mentioned, Duke, is that, yes, brothers are showing up for sisters. And I'm here to tell you, many brothers always have.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no media coverage.
Media coverage of those particular instances. I'm aware of it too. And it's difficult going across the landscape because it's like I know of multiple instances of Black men showing up and attempting to protect Black women, myself included. I was damn near killed trying to do it. Not kidding. But there is not a national narrative that showcases this particular engagement in our community. But there is a national narrative that shows that, quote unquote, only Black women are showing up as Black men. So I think it's pretty interesting what's going on and how this narrative is becoming real poison in our community.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on, I wanted to point out how easy it is to propagate because about the Meg Thee Stallion situation. And
I've heard some
who?
things. Yeah. Meg Thee Stallion, the rapper.
She
She's
was
a rapper.
shot in her foot, like Vera from Harlem Nights.
Oh, okay.
Make that comparison. But
Shot
so
my
I've
pinky toe.
heard there's been supposedly some new developments. I haven't confirmed any of the source, but
Yeah.
anyways, Megan was out, and she was with her someone she was dating at the time, another singer entertainer named Tory Lanez, and some things went down, and by the end of the night, she was shot in the foot, and it's become that Tory Lanez apparently shot her in the foot. And later on, I mean, there was a lot of jokes and laughs about it, particularly because people was comparing it to Harlem Nights. And she made a tweet in a reference, and it resonated with a lot of women. That black women, the tweet said, paraphrasing, "Black women are so unprotected. You all are joking about this, but this is my life, and I'm really traumatized by this incident." And then one of the latest developments, and I have not confirmed this source, so I don't want to take it anywhere with it, but there's been reports that apparently Tory Lanez shot Megan Thee Stallion out of self-defense, because apparently what happened, according to it, allegedly, is that he was flirting with one of the Kardashians, or the Kardashians was flirting with him, something around that lines, and Megan was upset.
She was bewitching him. Let's be real.
He was what?
She was bewitching him, but let's go on.
Okay.
But anyways, Megan was upset allegedly and began to attack Tory Lanez. And in self-defense, Tory Lanez shot her in the foot. And what's important to know about the dynamics between these two is that Tory Lanez is like 180 pounds and like, I think, what is he, like 5'4" or something? I don't remember. And Megan Thee Stallion is
something
quite voluptuous. Megan Thee Stallion is quite a full-figure woman. And so literally, like, you can pick up Tory and just throw him somewhere. So yeah, he's smaller than Kashama, if y'all can believe it.
No, you don't use me as a reference. You gotta use somebody like Kevin Hart or somebody. I got height from you.
Well, I had not heard about this, so thank you for the news, brother, about people getting shot in the foot like Harlem Nights, etc. I hadn't heard this. I knew nothing about this or about Portia in House Weaves, etc. But I'm intrigued by the reporting, and I'm glad you brothers raised stories of brothers having sisters' backs, because there is a strongly propelled myth that that's not the case. You probably heard that black men are supposedly the white supremacists of the black community, all this other crazy stuff.
Other white people, yeah.
That have gotten more press than what you're talking about, which actually occurred. So, anything else before we move to our other prepared topic?
I think we're prepared.
I think those are all the random black entanglements that popped up.
So then I'll reiterate the focus as Kashama already did. Black entanglements, the agenda to co-opt, slander, and derail black liberation. So one of the things, I want to let the people who are listening know how we come up with these topics real quick. Every week or so, the team, which is these brothers and Nathaniel, who's somewhere, there he is, talk about what should we talk about next, what is topical, what is educational, what's relevant, etc. And someone in the group, I forgot which one of y'all it was, but someone in the group talked about black entanglements and talked about the spectrum of issues relevant to that, which includes those things that were put in our flyer. We have Nick Cannon as a football player who I don't know who that is. I'm sure one of y'all will tell us who that is.
No, Nick Cannon isn't a football player. You think about Deshaun Jackson.
Football player I was saying there's a football player next to his image in our flyer. That's what I'm saying. And I'm asking, who is that?
Oh, you was missing your Oxford comma in your speech.
Deshaun Jackson.
Okay, cool. I didn't know who that was. And then we talked about the flag with the black fist ironically on it. I call it the Frankenstein flag. And the Black Trans Lives Matter mantra. At the top is Minister Louis Farrakhan next to the Star of David, in this instance representing white Jews, even though the Star of David was invented by Africans. But a lot of people don't know that. and just reiterating what our flyer looked like. So I think we selected Mr. Cannon to be our first discussion regarding the Black Entanglements, the agenda to co-opt and slander and derail Black liberation. So what does that have to do, guys, with Mr. Cannon? Now, let me say this before. I'm sorry, I can be real quick, Kashama. I predicted, and it's on Facebook, I think it was 2017, that they were going to come and get him, and that he was going to be attacked, and he was going to be threatened in terms of the longevity of his career on the popular stage. So I did predict that. I make predictions all the time. This is one of them that I did predict about 3 years ago, and here we are. But anyway, what happened to Mr. Cannon? Hello?
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna have to mute one of my devices. I sincerely apologize.
All
Okay.
right. So Cannon's story is he does a show, a Nick Cannon show podcast or something. And on it, he made commentary about some things that he either felt or learned. I didn't watch the entirety of it myself. I actually got more of a Cliff Notes version of it. But we're definitely here for people in the comments. Because Shama was the one who watched the whole thing.
So this is the thing. Before we even, I want us to get into Nick Cannon really as an individual, but I want us to have some context around it. Is that one, he was accused of being anti-Semitic. And it fits within a larger narrative that Black people are particularly anti-Semitic. The narrative has been prevalent. It's been around for a while. It's been around since, I would say, the 80s. Cleo can correct me on that. But that narrative kind of came prevalent around the time when Farrakhan first popped on the scene, Dr. Khalid Muhammad. A lot of these things happen. So we're dealing with that narrative. And then Nick Cannon showed up in that.
Once Jesse Jackson called New York Town.
Yeah.
And that became controversial and considered anti-Semitic as well.
And you've had all types of clashes, particularly in New York, between Black people and the Hasidic Jewish population there, as well as just their, regular white Jews. But to go into Nick Cannon, everybody, I don't know if everybody knows, he does a show called Cannon Class that is broadcast on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So just like Cleo said, you predicted he was going to get in some good trouble one day because he has been.
Just to be clear, Kashama, I've never seen that show you're talking about, but he did some Black affirming videos that are relatively powerful, especially compared to his peers who don't make such videos, and as many as he has, trying to apparently wake Black people up and wake white supremacists up. That's the reason I made that prediction, because of those videos.
He's also done some other things too. His behavior. He stood up for, I believe it was Gabrielle Union, when she was speaking out on the racism that she experienced with, I believe it was America's Got Talent, one of those shows. He actually supported her on that. So he's kind of shown himself to be a solid brother and has had a lot of respect from, the Black community, especially those revolutionary circles. But he does Cannon's Class, where he's had people like Dr. Joy DeGruy. He's had some key members of the Nation of Islam. Y'all know some other guests he's had on there to come and talk?
Didn't watch Cannon Class.
I didn't watch Cannon Class either. But I did watch Dr. Joy DeGruy's episode, and I thought you might have caught that, dude.
I didn't know that was. This is my first time knowing that Joy DeGruy was on there, which I will go back to watch because I'm a big fan of Dr. Joy DeGruy. But
he comes through my screen, but I never paid attention to him, mainly because I always knew that he was a baby in his knowledge, and in his awakening. So I didn't hold nothing against him. I just knew that I didn't really have to tune into him because he wasn't teaching me nothing.
So what does he have to do with the topic of Black entanglements and the interruption of Black liberation?
He was accused of being anti-Semitic because of an episode that he did with Professor Griff. And he was also.
What did he say? What exactly did he say that led to that accusation?
He didn't say nothing that was anti-Semitic. It was all made up, if you want to be honest.
Okay, so I watched one of the things that he's being called out on is he mentioned inside of that particular episode that Black people are the real Jews, and there are individuals who pretend to be Jews, and that has been a clip that has been cut from that particular episode and copied in some of the news broadcastings. There's been other language where he said that white people are monsters. Pretty much, I'm paraphrasing that. You may remember the exact quotation for that, but he mentioned
it taken out of context. Yeah, you can take all those things out of context and just shoot it at people. However, the subject of the Jews came up because Farrakhan came up. Now, this is how all this tied together. Farrakhan gave a speech on the 4th of July that was supposed to be broadcast on Fox Soul Network. It was taken down because very high-profile white people like Jake Tapper, among many, took to Twitter, took to social media, and condemned Farrakhan and asked for Fox not to broadcast it. Farrakhan then had to do the broadcast from their own private website and put it on YouTube. But the subject of Farrakhan came up, and they started talking about how he is often labeled as anti-Semitic. That's when the question of what is anti-Semitic, what is Semitic, and who are the Semitic people. So when you get into that conversation, you're talking about facts now. You're talking about science. We're talking about geographical origins of people. We know that there are Semitic people still in their origins to this day in Eastern Africa.
That's right. The Philoshes, for one thing.
So go ahead.
No, Mr. Williams, Abe Williams, who's been quite expressive in the chat, mentioned that Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and her research was quoted, and that he mentioned that Dr. Griff had spoken. But I'm trying to find out the quote, if anybody has it, because I have not heard any of this directly. Like I said, I predicted he was going to be attacked because of those videos, and I know that pro-Black people who get some time on the popular stage, which is extremely rare, are going to be attacked and are going to be dismissed from the popular stage because white people do that kind of mantra.
Nashira Saran says Nick's comments were offensive to Black Jews and non-Black Jews.
Yeah, so a popular article that popped up was I'm a Jew of color and I won't be silent about let me get the exact title. I won't be silent about anti-Semitism or something to that effect.
Who's this?
Let's see who wrote this. It says, I'm a Jew of color. I won't be quiet about anti-Semitism. And is by Dr. Soraya Nadia McDonald. I don't know who she is, but she wrote an article that had got a lot of traction online. And I read the article. I did read the entire article, but essentially she was stating that the comments perpetrated violence towards the Jewish community, the quote unquote myths that Jews are in power or they have all the resources, have been a long-standing cycle of abuse towards Jewish individuals, and she brought that up in relation to how things are going. So I believe, and I may be wrong, that Nashira Saran is of the same perspective. What I find interesting about that article is that inside of it, she mentions that as a Black individual, she has to also deal with racism inside of Jewish spaces. And then when she's outside of Jewish spaces, she has to deal with anti-Semitism outside of those spaces. And so what I think is interesting to me is that if you're stating that you have to deal with racism inside of the Jewish space, then how is it that someone that is outside of a Jewish space is supposed to see Jewish individuals as anything other than racist? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. But what I'm trying to find out, or maybe you've already covered it, and I was trying to, Jill Nagel linked an article in her comments that apparently are the source of what Cannon said, but I can't cut and paste them, so I can't see them for myself. But I'm trying to find out what exactly the man said, so I can decipher myself.
I haven't read that article, but all I've read so far are basically editorials or people basically just kind of talking about how they don't like what he said. But nobody has been very specific. Even to my knowledge, even the rabbi who came on his show, he pointed to something that Nick Cannon said about the world banking systems and about 13 families, and that was pointed out as being like anti-Semitic when there is a world banking system and there are actually 13 families that have whose wealth has carried over from hundreds of years that are involved in a lot of international banking and so forth. And he mentioned the Rothschilds, and that wasn't mentioned in the context of, hey, they're Jews. That was a totally separate conversation. Between when they were talking about Jews, it was centered around Farrakhan and the origins of what Semitic people are. When they began talking about bankers and the Rothschilds, it was purely about economics and white power. So,
well, here are a few of the actual quotes from the article. Jill Nagel shares that those without, this is what he said, those without dark skin have a deficiency that historically forced them to act out of fear and commit acts of violence to survive. He said they had to be savages. Nick said, adding to that, he was referring to Jewish people, white people, Europeans, among others. And
wait, let me stop that right there, because that addition saying referring to, that shouldn't even be in quotation marks. That is the author saying that he was referring to Jewish people, white people, European. He was referring to white people, whether you're Jewish, Catholic, or whatever.
Okay.
He was talking about European origins, and he was speaking on actual theories and stuff that even white historians and anthropologists speak about when it comes to the history of Europe.
Okay, and Yeme added that he said black people were the real Jews and white people were savages. Okay.
That quote in regards to though they have a deficiency and have historically forced them to act out of fear and make acts of violence to survive. He said they had to be savages. That's more in context as far as the savage statement.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let me attempt to interpret some of this, and warning, some people might be offended by what I'm getting ready to say, but I am interpreting based on perspectives like that I've heard before. Based on what Dr. Francis Welsing has said, which is in those comments, and based on my own perspective of white people and white savagery. According to biologists and physiologists, and this is similar to what you were saying, Kashama, according to some people who look at biology, the state of being white is so supposedly degenerative, that we are all black, we all came from Africa, and white people are a product of a certain level of albinism. And albinism is supposedly a trait of being black that has less melanin. And according to some people, having less melanin means that white people are, when it comes to their relationship to the sun, are more at risk, in danger, because of the lack of melanin. And some people interpret that lack of melanin as being in a lesser state naturally than other black people. Also, it's being told by Mitch Monroe that, and I didn't hear this interview, that Dr. Francis Welsing was quoted. Now, Dr. Francis Welsing, who was both a MD and went to all the universities to get that MD and a PhD, she was both, and she went to traditional schools to get these degrees, had a similar perspective about the fact that white people are concerned about genetic annihilation and act savagely in defense of themselves in response to their concern about black people, black numbers, black power, black liberation. There's stories that we know from Mary Turner to Emmett Till to all kinds of black people who were murdered for being scary to white people. And during the enslavement period, when white people had too many slaves and they were concerned about being outnumbered, black people were murdered to balance power again. So some people consider that savage. Some people consider what happened to Mary Turner. I don't know if everybody knows what happened to Mary Turner. But what happened to Mary Turner was and I'm giving a short version of what happened to Mary Turner. Mary Turner's husband was unjustly murdered, and she was upset about it. So she walked out of her house, stomping, angry about the unjust murder of her husband, and she happened to be pregnant. And the white men who killed her husband were like, "F you." And in response to her having the nerves to resist, they stripped her naked. They tied her up to a tree. They put lighter fluid or gasoline all over her body, lit her on fire, and took her baby out of her stomach. And the baby was still alive and crying. The baby fell on the ground. And these same people who were gruesomely murdering this woman stomped on a crying baby's head. That's pretty savage. So, in context to what people are saying, what might be missing from the whole conversation is context.
Exactly.
I didn't hear what's his name? Nick Cannon's commentary. But I do know that when Jews feel offended, and I'm jealous that they have this kind of collective power. I wish Black people did the same thing. They don't play. They, for example, some of you might remember when Michael Jackson on his History album used the term "kike me something." He used the term "kike," which is which is the almost equivalent of an N-word in terms of being a racial anti-Semitic insult. He used the term "kike me" in his song, and the Jewish Offensive League had his record stopped at the presses, and they were successful in making that word be taken off of his records. Though a lot of Jewish-run companies are not taking off bitch, hoe, and the other words that offend to Black people. So there are some dichotomies here that create concern. And terms like savage and Jewish people are wicked, that sounds pretty attacking. And I can see saying that Jews as generally are wicked as being anti-Semitic comment.
Wait, who said Jews are wicked?
Well, at the time, I'm reading what Jill Nagel has.
No, don't read what Jill Nagel says. She's not talking. She's going on a tangent about Professor Griff, who was the guest that he had on his show.
Okay. Well, it does say
why he's bringing in him in the conversation.
Okay. Well, she asked a question. Let's see if we can answer.
Okay.
And Adam, are you going to put her question up, or should I do it?
So,
this is Jill. I think that brush is pretty wide. What does any of white supremacist savagery have to do with Jews?
Could I? And I want to be very clear that this is the moment of controversy for real. But I want to tell you that growing up in American society, I had no idea that there was other races. All I knew was white and Black, because that was all the education system really perpetrated for me for. So when I learned of Asians, I didn't really know them as anything other than, well, they either light white or light Black. Like, I don't know what like where they particularly fall in far as the ethnicity background of different groups of people. So when we look at our education system that has a dichotomy of white versus Black, and all we know is a consistent history of white individuals causing harm and destruction to those individuals who are Black identified, then yes, there is this overall sensation of, well, you folks are evil. And what's interesting is that some of the stories that you mentioned earlier, Cleo, such as Sister Mary Turner, that's from the particular Jim Crow / lynching period. And what people don't want to attest or recognize is that the Holocaust was absolutely historical, not done by me, but also y'all white scholars who y'all praise and love and everything else, was inspired by American Jim Crow laws and practices. Just straight up, Hitler was inspired by the laws and practices that white people imposed on Black Americans. So when we look at the xenophobia that happened in Germany, the xenophobia that was happening, there is no context of the quote unquote Black Jews that are there, because we have to remember that Jews is also a convoluted particular term, because it's not just ethnicity, it's also a combination of religion. And as far as I'm concerned, there's Black Christians, and those people are lost. And so we have to recognize that we live in a particular situation where one, we are ahistorical. We do not know all the informational histories about people, which has been curated by white supremacist myth. And so when we grow up and start to define ourselves in this particular society, we do have to look at, well, white people are savages. This is language that has been going on for quite a while. James Baldwin would call them moral monsters, and Nick Cannon would say you're evil. And what else is there to go on?
And another thing, Duke, I'm glad you said that. Like when you were growing up, you just knew white and black. Even growing up, I read about Anne Frank and read about the Holocaust. But there's no way I had of distinguishing who was Jewish among all the white people around me. Nobody made that distinction, and the fact that and the narrative, as if black people actually make that distinction and actually care about whether you're a Jewish white or a Catholic white is false. Is what we're saying. That's false. The point is, when we get ready to talk about the Portuguese role in the slave trade, which they played a major role, especially in the early days, it's not a problem. It's history. When we talk about the role Britain played in the slave trade, it's not a problem. It's history. But if we mention roles that Jewish businessmen played in the slave trade were anti-Semitic, that's a problem. And this word anti-Semitic is being thrown around, and black people are the ones that are getting the brunt of it, because the people who are truly anti-Semitic are other white people. It's only other white people that have ever done anything to Jews on an impactful level that have ever mattered to y'all. You wouldn't be this hypersensitive if it wasn't for your fellow white people. And they only did it because of that little drop of African blood that may or may not be flowing through your veins.
Yeah, the term Semite means semi-white and semi-African. Some people don't know that. In terms of the term semi, and where it really comes from. And I think it has to do with the African root of Judaism. But one
interesting moment. I just want to add, like, even with inside that context, we have whites over here who are anti-interracial babies, as well as whites over here who are pro-interracial babies. And it's like the cognitive dissonance that white people have to go through in order to figure out where they draw the line as far as whether or not they affirm half black or whole black. Is interesting to look at. I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, one thing I want to say about this, and there's lots of commentary, by the way, if you guys ever noticed, is that I consider white Jews white people. And I consider white Jews, white folks who benefit from the blood money of white privilege. And I consider white people, who Jews, Italians, etc., as people who are involved, whether they chose to or not enough resisted, into the blood money that's known more commonly as white supremacy and the oppression of black people. And there are lots of people who are white that are Jews and non-Jews, etc., who control the lives, the destiny, the lifespan, and the quality of life of black people, and all kinds of relative instances and occasions that really oppress black people. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why there's been what? Well, I thought I heard something. I think the reason why there's been Jewish focus on it is because some people find it ironic that a group that was so oppressed that you can watch any TV station that you have tonight, you will see something about the Jewish Holocaust. Even if you watch what's that X-Men series, the cartoon, there's Jews make sure that their mantra and that they were oppressed by Hitler and games, video games, it's everywhere. And so I think what's ironic and what was a discussion about this is because while Jews are complaining about being oppressed, they have lots of power.
I just want to bring up because some of the people who's watching this may know this, and some who don't. But you brought up X-Men, and what people don't know some people don't know is that Magneto was based off of Malcolm X, and Professor Xavier was based off of Martin Luther King. And the idea was about these two men's ideology, who was more angry and whatnot else. But they gave Magneto the Holocaust background. So I just that was very interesting that you drew those two together. And again, I see it as another co-opting of the particular Black struggle of what has been going on in our society. And once again, if the Holocaust is based off of American Jim Crow laws, it's really interesting when people say that what Black people went through was the Holocaust, was the Holocaust. When in reality, what Jews have went through is a result of the consequences of white supremacy on Black people.
We were the prototype. A Holocaust happened in Namibia before it happened in Germany. Before they took the show on the road, they perfected it on Black bodies first.
And white people called Jews are so powerful that what happened in Germany, which was a European foreign phenomenon, there's some people who have heard about it so much in this country, they thought it happened here because it's so pronounced on the landscape. For example, in Washington, D.C., there's a Holocaust museum. They just got finished building an African-American museum just recently, relatively speaking, but it was always a Holocaust museum. And this is an event that happened in Europe, not in the United States. That shows you the power of white hegemony, in this instance, white Jewish hegemony. There are instances of murder of Black people and Africans that surpass what happened during the Jewish Holocaust by millions and millions and millions and millions. But the Holocaust, as it's called, is considered one of the most tragic incidences that ever happened, so much so that in Baltimore, where I have an office, there is a monument to the Holocaust. It's a large monument downtown Baltimore. This is the 70% Black city, and there is no Black monument to the Holocaust on Black people. That still is happening, and that did happen in this city. So whether people get mad and want to call people anti-Semitic or not, and I don't know what Cannon said, but I do know that people who are called Jews, white people who are called Jews, have participated in white supremacist hegemony, including deadly and lethal versions of white supremacy hegemony. And I think that's part of the issue here, along with Jews, this is the part I envy, having enough power to defend their image.
Like you said, Cleo, I can't be mad at them for saying never forget or never again. I can't be mad at you for saying that, but get off Black people, especially when you know what the deal is between us.
Yeah. Isn't it? Now, this is a rumor I've heard. I never looked into it. I never paid much attention, but I'm assuming my brothers here will know more about it. But is the American government responsible for paying some type of restitution or funding or aid to survivors and the descendants of the Jewish Holocaust?
Yes, and send millions upon millions every year to Israel.
I think that's interesting. I just, again, for something that did not happen.
That's another hot button. The minute you have a political criticism of the state of Israel as a country, you're also anti-Semitic. Just let y'all know.
Well, that means we can't talk about the Falashan Jews and who are the oldest Jewish group.
They Black. It don't matter. You can talk about them.
The oldest,
especially if they got some men among them.
Anyway. The Jews are experiencing racism, white supremacy mythology to lethal levels or levels that create poverty in Israel as we speak. Anyway, I think we've covered that enough. In summary, Nick Cannon has been one of these rare popular culture jewels, in my opinion, in that he was, while being on the mainstream stage on whatever station he was on, was simultaneously up in the Black community, simultaneously advocating for Black people, simultaneously being a critic of white supremacy mythology, simultaneously attending Howard University to get his degree, simultaneously putting himself and his body and his life and his culture, the presence of Black people for progressive reasons, which cannot even be said for most of his peers. And again, the reason why I predicted they were going to come after him is because of that dichotomy, him being on the popular stage on $1 trillion shows and being in the Black community at the same time, advocating actively for Black people. That was unusual, and so I knew that they were going to come after him, and they did. I apologize to the audience that I don't know all the gory details about what he said, but based on what I've heard from those of in the audience who shared exact quotes, quoting Dr. Frances West Welsing, who talked about the condition of being white, being a genetic deficiency, and her proof of that was, for example, white people are having a hard time reproducing. And are having a harder and harder and harder time reproducing as time goes on. It's not becoming any easier for them. Black folks and everybody else are not having any problems reproducing. And we've heard about the calendar that's saying that this country is going to be majority not white relatively soon. That's mostly connected to white people's relative inability to reproduce. Well, from Dr. Welsing's perspective, who was a scientist, that's a deficiency situation, a deficiency in being able to reproduce compared to other groups. Now, you can call that, white supremacy, Black supremacists, or anti-Semitic, but you can also call it a biological fact. You can go on Google and look up articles on white people having challenges reproducing. Some of the things motivating whites, including white supremacists who go on murderous rampages against abortion, is that most of the people getting abortion, in terms of hard numbers, are white girls. And they don't want those babies killed because they're having a hard time reproducing anyway. I'm not making that up. One of the lucky things that you people in this era have that I didn't have when I was young, was this thing called Google, where you can actually find the scientist. Matter of fact, they had shows on ABC about the Midwest and about the slowdown in reproduction in the Midwest among white people. So I do think it's not a good idea to make sweeping statements and say all Jews are this and all Blacks are that. It's important to break down the gory details and the contextualization of your perspective to help people not go there. However, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing that Nick Cannon could have done ultimately to finally be pushed off the national scene, because he has put his time and energy, while being a rich, famous person, into the lives and defense of Black people. And we don't play that.
As we move to the next topic, I just want to, since it's on the flyer, I just want to wrap this up all with a bow. As a football player, he tweeted something where he was allegedly quoting Hitler, or he thought he was quoting Hitler, where Hitler said that Black people are the true Jews. I just think that if you're going to do something on the internet, especially where you're going to be quoting someone who was evil, legitimately evil, then you should fact check and make sure that source.
Is that the tweet? You saw that tweet?
I saw it, and it was an Instagram post. It was an Instagram post, and it wasn't true. I mean, Hitler did not say that, one. And then two, if you are going to be quoting Hitler of all people, make sure it's correct. There's no other way around it. Make sure that is something that Hitler actually said. Also, don't get it twisted. I don't know. I think because of the way history has shown up, or the lack of history has shown up for Black individuals, we've been looking for affirmation and resonation of ourselves across the globe. And so when people see things like allegedly Hitler was quote unquote on our side, Hitler was no friend to Black people, not at all. If you look at policy,
on our side.
There's a group of Black individuals who think that Hitler was allegedly on our side. There's some fake articles and news and things where Hitler was saying that he was killing all these individuals because he was making space for the real Jews or the real Black people. Like this is it is insane. It absolutely is insane. However, people get trinkets of this particular messaging, don't do the research, and then you have moments where this football player posts alleged speech by Hitler based off of this particular psychology, and that's why we're in this situation. So no, do not condone that. Allegedly, someone said earlier in the chat, I don't know about it, but allegedly someone said in the chat that Nick Cannon condoned that too, and Nick Cannon should be called out on that particular component as well. It's just not true. But like, if it was true, we could be talking about something different. But
well, see, dude, I don't think we should get off of this just yet, because there's another component to this, which is the fact that Nick Cannon did eventually cave into Viacom.
Yeah.
And he did apologize. And he did catch the brunt of Black Twitter, Black Facebook, Black YouTube, everything, right, for this. And he was significantly stressed, according to him, because of it. And what you brought up was the fact that, you say you think he was actually condoning that crazy narrative about Hitler. It was I think one of the things, for the very reason why I was never really watching him until he brought on Dr. Joy and then brought on Griff. The reason I wasn't watching him is because I knew he was a baby and didn't know nothing. And there's nothing wrong with you learning and you waking up, right, so to speak, you getting woke, and you want to put in work for your people, you want to do things. But I think part of the reason why he was even really so out front and trying to have like diarrhea of everything that he's learned so far, or think he's learned so far, is because there's a certain amount of ego that comes into play.
Well, one of the things that concern me, and I do think we need to move on soon because we do have other topics, but one of the things that concerned me about Nick when I first heard him rebelling against the people attempting to control him before he went into his, what I call Tracy Morgan copycat apology parade. Before he went there, he was like saying, "Give me my product back," which was one of these shows, and he was resisting. But what bothered me about what I saw, and I felt this way when Kanye West, way back in the day, said that George Bush didn't care about black folks, and when he snatched Taylor Swift's mic in defense of Beyonce, and somebody else did something similar. But anyway, the bottom line is that I was concerned that Nick Cannon would not have any peer support for his position, and that people who were famous like him, because, for example, to be clear, when Kanye West, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, accurately described George Bush as someone who doesn't care for black people, when it came to his peer group, he got crickets. When he called himself defending a black woman who he felt was way more talented than Taylor Swift, and I agree that she's Beyonce. Let me finish.
I want to make sure that's in the point.
But let me finish. No. I'm not. That's not going to be my point. That probably will be in your point. But my point is that his intentionality, even back when he talked about George Bush, was to be affirming of black people and a critic of racism. And what he got when he did that was what Nick Cannon got, and was what's the comedian's name, the sister who tried to
Monique.
What Monique got. When Monique walked into the camera in pure English and said, "Black folks, I need you to boycott Netflix." I said, "Oh, girl, she gonna wind up hating black folks and living pressures in real life, because black people are not gonna step up in no meaningful numbers, or it's not gonna look like black people stepped up in meaningful numbers because how the press controls everybody's brain, and she's gonna feel like she's been left hanging." Kanye felt like he was left hanging, and Nick was initially left hanging in terms of peer support. So when they wind up going into this apology thing and losing their mind, we're doing like Kanye did, joining Trump, forgetting that the first black president called him a jackass in public and didn't give him no love. We run black people crazy and make them disoriented and make them in question about all they've done for black people when black people don't show up and have their back. And it could be traumatizing, particularly if you have other traumas going on in your life, like a mother dying, etc. But it could be very, very painful when you have spent your life trying to be an advocate for black people, and all you get is crickets.
Mm-hmm. There's no trophy for being pro-black, and so it is like this lonely process, especially in the entertainment industry, which we know particularly looks out and seeks for individuals who are not going to trouble the waters of white supremacist myth. They want people who do just walk the thin line. And so individuals, when an individual speaks up for Black people, there should be a response and a nurturing from the overall Black community, is because he is defending, or she is defending us, or speaking up for us. And oftentimes there is not enough of a cultural response to make sure that these individuals are safe. The same thing happened with Kaepernick. Same thing that happened with Kaepernick. Kaepernick should not have lost his job. If we were engaged in protecting him as much as he was engaged in protecting us.
That's right.
So when we think about the collective powers that we mentioned of Jews, we're talking about that particular juxtaposition, because you cannot do certain things to individuals in Jew culture and get away with it. However, when it comes to Black individuals, it is a particular light. And there is some internal work that has to be done on our side about that, but there's also lots of outside forces that prevents collective resonance and cultural cohesion. But I was good with the topic.
Duke, that's a very important point that you made, Duke, and I want to reiterate and underscore part of what you said when you mentioned that, and I hope I'm paraphrasing you correctly, that when Jews protest what they're calling anti-Semitism, they get to do it and safely do it and get what they want. Mm-hmm. People taking off shows, blah 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 blah. But when Black people, such as Colin Kaepernick, such as Nick Cannon, such as Monique, such as Kanye West,
this is not the time, this is not the format, this is everything.
Exactly. And their intention, because they're trying to care about Black people, and in Kanye's case, his mother, who taught Black history, was part of his inspiration. They assume, because they are talking for Black people, that they're going to get some love, some kind of way, at least some residual love. And when they get crickets, it can be very, very painful. I
think it's important to note that part of the reason why Jews can activate that particular power safely in this society is because the national concept and outlook of Jews is white individuals. Even if there are Black people who participate or engage in the culture or from the particular region, the national outlook, the mind, the way that you conceptualize and think about Jews is you think about white people. And so therefore they are safe within a white supremacist society.
Yep. And I think we should caveat that though with, and I agree with what you just said, Duke, but also compared to Italians, if you will, who are now letting themselves be white, and other groups who are now identifying as white because there's benefit in it. Jews are the only ones who on occasion have to deal with assassinations, ethnic assassinations, having their temples, etc., attacked, and they've had rabbis murdered.
Mm-hmm.
So that on the moment that occurs, make them seem like an oppressed group. However, unfortunately for people who are called Jews, just like Italians and others, they're buying into the concept of being white, which is the equivalent of being a monster. Because whiteness is an artificial human concoction built in honor of the whole agenda to oppress everybody else who's not called white. So once you decide to go on and join the white club, you're joining a savage club.
Right.
So, take that and do what you will with it. All right. Well, speaking of...
On to the next entanglement.
For those watching, the topic is Black Entanglements, the agenda to co-op and slander and derail Black liberation. And just to briefly summarize, as far as some of us are concerned, the attack on Nick Cannon was a attack and a derailment of a brother who did have Black affirming narratives, who no longer has a popular stage location to be as effective as he could have been otherwise. And I also think that, like you said, Kashama, he was a baby in terms of being new to this kind of consciousness, which made him vulnerable to relapse. Because as far as I'm concerned, he's relapsing now into white supremacist accommodationist behavior. But I believe, like as I said a few weeks ago, if Black people had his back in powerful ways, he might think twice about being an accommodationist because somebody has his back. And when we don't have each other's back, when some of us step out, we wind up creating white accommodations who are afraid they won't be able to pay their rent no more and all this other kind of stuff. And that ain't true. Canada got enough money to buy a city. Exactly. But fear and anxiety can cause hallucinatory insecurities. And when your people don't come out for you in ways that you wish, particularly your peers, you can relapse. Now let's go back to the other issue, or front issue. Black trans lives matter. There, you can go. I was in Atlanta recently, and I went to the corner of White, Gay, and LGBT Boulevard, somewhere near 10th and something in Atlanta, where they got the streets painted with the rainbow flag. I saw a picture of the Black Power fist painted on top of the white gay flag, and I almost had a crash. I was shaking my head so hard because the image bothers me. Anyway, some people think that the white gay community is derailing black people getting liberation option possibilities and opportunities. And this was all inspired initially in terms of the most recent events by George Floyd's murder. And as opposed to George Floyd's murder being continued to be the center issue, along with Breonna Taylor and the brother that was killed in Georgia. What was his name? Ahmaud Arbery. Yeah, Ahmaud Arbery. There's people who feel like the Black Trans Lives Matter issue has derailed a Black liberation focus. And they feel like that the Black liberation focus does not include trans lives, so they have been successful. Only a block from my office, just like in Washington, D.C., with probably the same size letters, there's huge lettering in the street that says Black Trans Lives Matter. This is a city that has had 7 trans lives taken and about 1,000 or more other Black lives taken every weekend.
Since this year started. Yeah, since this year started, right?
Yes, since this year started.
Yeah, it's important for me to know that.
And there's never even been Black women's lives matter iconically put in the streets. But so trans lives matter has been, and I want to, with your help, deconstruct what's going on here. Duke, you going to say something?
I have one major critique of the Black Trans Lives Matter, and I think that particular critique is just hypocrisy. And what I mean by that is that hypocrisy, because the Black Trans Lives Matter movement is inspired by the work and advocacy of the larger organization, the official organization of Black Lives Matter. And inside of Black Lives Matter, if you go to their page, they talk about the upliftment of Black trans lives, as well as deconstructing the traditional family concept and uplifting all Black people, blah, blah, blah. No mention of Black men, by the way, and uplifting Black women's narratives, all of that. And it's inspired by this particular language. However, what I find hypocritical is that the Black Lives Matter movement states itself and positions itself because it is talking specifically about the violence that is perpetrated towards Black community by police officers and institutional racism and things of that matter. When I see Black Trans Lives Matter approach the particular podium, it is not about the abuse that Black trans women or men face by police forces. It is not about the misgendering that happens. It's not about the rape and abuse that happens by police officers, which is there. All of these things absolutely exist and happen as well. However, the larger narrative is about intracommunal crime that happens in our communities where Black trans women happen to be murdered or harmed by allegedly cis/allegedly heterosexual Black men. And so when we see that this particular conversation happens, I'm always curious about why. Because if we mention that Black intracommunal crime is not part of the narrative of what Black Lives Matter, the larger organization, is supposed to be addressing, then why is it that this particular component of the intracommunal crime is all of a sudden noteworthy? Even and now this is the other controversial part, and people call it a pandemic. You can't call 7 people dying a year in a city a pandemic when there are thousands,
or an epidemic.
or an epidemic. And so this is the narrative that I challenge consistently, because I know I know what a person specifically who transitioned, who said that they felt being a Black trans woman was safer than being a Black man, and this person happens to live in New York. And so when we look at the reality of how harm and violence happens in our community, we should be critical of a group or a march or a movement that attempts to serve itself as the most marginalized, the most harmed in our community, when the statistics show that ain't true.
Well, Duke, speaking of statistics, I have some from the FBI on the number of Black people who are murdered in the last count. It takes 1.5 years for the FBI to collect their data, so it's usually a year behind. And Adam just put it up. But before I go into it, I want to mention something. Right before the COVID epidemic, I was asked to speak at a private university in upstate. No, it was in New York. It was around New York City, Long Island, New York. And I was speaking as a visiting scholar to a room full of PhDs. And because of the purpose of my being invited there, the majority of the people in the room were Black. There was a few white folks in the room as well, but the majority of them were Black. And it was a relatively diverse Black group, meaning there were same-gender loving people there, male and female, particularly female. There were heterosexual people there, all kinds of older people, younger people. But this is the part that was interesting. During my talk on deconstructing normalized white supremacist norms in Black settings, a sister stood up and she had the gay rainbow earrings, and she had a shirt that says something about a queer something. So it was clear as a bell, Stevie Wonder could see that she aligned herself with the gay paradigm. And she said, I appreciate what you're saying. And she didn't come off appreciative. Her body language wasn't appreciative. I'm telling you what her mouth said. She said, I appreciate what you're saying, but what bothers me about your presentation is that you haven't mentioned the murder of trans women, of Black trans women. And I said, well, I mentioned everybody in the Black community initially, and at some point I was going to get specific about subgroups, but Black people are being killed, including trans women. This PhD professor said this in public in front of a bunch of other people with gusto. She said, well, Black trans people are being killed every day. And you should not be given a talk about Black people without giving a demonstrative focus to trans Black women because they're being killed daily.
That's just.
And I stayed very calm. That's part of my strategy. And I said, okay, well, at this point in time, if they're being killed daily, that would be about almost 200 trans.
200, right? Yeah, I have to count for 200
at this point. So, is that what you're telling me is occurring? That about 200 trans people are being killed? Because that would be the case if you're saying every day. And this PhD professor backed up a little bit and said, it's a lot. I said, well, let's take advantage of technology and see how many.
Very academic number, huh? A lot.
Yeah, let's take advantage of technology and see how many indeed have been killed. At that time, it was 15. I said, okay.
Right.
I said, now I want to make it clear to you that I think it's horrible that trans people are being killed. I don't support it. I resist it. I think it's an important issue along with the other murders that's happening along the Black spectrum, including of Black men and women, et cetera. We should be concerned about everybody. But there's an agenda here that we don't realize is going on that I'm going to speak to. But let's look at the data. And the data that I showed is what the data that I'm getting ready to show you all, and that Adam put up on the screen for us. Now I'm trying to see it so I can make sure it's large enough for me to see. It's difficult to read because it's so small on my screen, but it has here race of offender. Let's not get into the race of offender yet. Let's look at the sheer numbers of people who have been murdered. These are the homicide stats from the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. They collect data on who's murdered. This was from 2018.
I think you have to scroll down, Cleo, to get to the victim. From my screen, I can only see the offender.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I see. Yeah, I see.
Oh, I see victim now. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me finish this, y'all, because I don't want to bore people with stats and have them scratching their head. Now, mind you, you can find these same statistics on Google. These are FBI surveillance reports on murders in the United States. Everybody has access to this. And according to this data, now in this same year, 28 transgender people were reported as being murdered. 28. The males who were murdered were 2,603, and the females were 291. Let me see that again. The males in that year who have been murdered resulting from homicide was 2,601, and the women were 2,091 in terms of men and women. And 28 trans people were murdered. Now, again, because people can get very, very defensive and irrational and opportunistic because they like to win the oppression contest. I'm not saying that it should be dismissed and become an irrelevant issue that trans people are murdered. What I'm saying is that there's propaganda afoot that has people saying stuff, including PhDs, that black trans women are being murdered every day when that's not the case.
Right.
As a matter of fact, black trans women are rarely murdered in the black community. Number one. Number two, some of those murderers were not black men. Now, I don't want to get any more into the details of that, but I want people to understand that people like George Floyd are murdered almost by the time the year is up, over 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
And women, almost 500.
There is two things that I usually hear as like the counter argument, quote unquote, to this. And I want to address those because I'm pretty sure anyone who sees this may run into that or may be thinking that or can't wait for the comments to state it. But there's one argument that says that trans individuals are constantly misgendered, which we cannot deny. And therefore, sometimes the police reports do not account for the numbers there. However, I do want people to just know realistic and scientifically and speak rationally that 24 does not exponentially become 300 or 4,000 because of a few individuals who have been misgendered by murder. That's just rational thought. Two is often, and this is just speaks to a larger culture now of racialized misandry, oftentimes the critique or response is, well, it's black men murdering each other, so what? And what I will offer to that is that when it comes to any other group or dynamic, when it comes to any type of sociological study or psychological study, there is never an answer of so what. It is always an examination of what are the policies and practices and the culture at hand that contributes to the violence that these individuals are perpetrating against each other. This happens for lesbian couples who have reportedly much higher rates of domestic violence than heterosexual couples and quote unquote gay identified couples. This happens for trans women who engage in sex work, who engage in various different harms. Like there's always an examination of what are the systems at play that contributes to the violence at hand. It is never of I'm simply going to blame the victim, because we have to also remember that this males includes individuals who are at the age of 13 as well as the age of 74, 94. And so one of the latest studies that also show is that there's a huge spike in the amount of Black male deaths between the ages of 13 and I think it was 62 the last time I checked. Up until there's just this huge spike that happens in our community.
Well, one thing that
oh no, yeah, but no. Well, I'm gonna step to the pulpit for a second because Duke, you brought up some things that are very important, and that it's not doing Black trans people any favor not to put your death in context. These people are not putting your death in context because, like Cleo said, there's an agenda, and that agenda is to profit. That agenda is to profit off of Black death, period. And if they can deflect off of what's really happening and use your gullible self as a proxy, or as a puppet, I should say, to bring in cash and funding to them under the guise that you should be the focus of the Black Lives Matter or the Black liberation movement, that's not doing you any favors when, in fact, like Duke said, there are so many trans people that are forced into homelessness, forced into sex work. That places you in harm's way to a certain extent. I remember meeting a trans person in DC that was from Atlanta, gave me a packet. It was a little book that they had compiled that had the testimonies of trans people in Atlanta who talked about how the cops would pick them up and rape them and then take them to jail for soliciting sex work. Many times they were teenagers on the street, just had nowhere to go. And they would be
But that's not what Black Trans Lives Matter is talking about.
That's not what Trans Lives Matter is talking about.
That's not being engaged.
You're Black behind no reparations. You're Black. You are in the position you in because you come from slaves just like me.
But there's another issue that I think there's two issues, and I hope I remember to raise them both. But one issue I want to raise is that David Chappelle mentioned during one of his more well-known shticks, if you will, or performances about how transgender people are marginalized even by the gay community. Mm-hmm. And transgender people, even among same-gender loving Black people, men in particular, are not necessarily embraced or provided space to be who they are. One of the things that David Chappelle, who's a Black male, said was that in his performance was that the transgender people were on the outside of the car. So we talk about a group that just got their T in LGBTQ relatively recently. So they are doing some compensatory stuff to make up for lost time in terms of acknowledgement. And for the first time in history, transgendered people are relevant. One of the things that I think is missing from this whole thing, though, is that the Black trans people are not relevant on terms that are affirming of Black people, but that's an entanglement and a derailing of a larger Black phenomenon. And they don't realize, and I've talked to some of them, they don't realize what I'm getting ready to tell you. First of all, the white gay community, similar to white Jews and other white groups, is a very powerful group because they get to benefit from the blood money of white supremacy themselves. And they get to yield that power and that access and that optic of whiteness. White gays decided once they were successful with dealing with HIV compared to other communities, to move on to marriage. And they had Barney Frank, who was part of the Congress, and they went politically from HIV because they got money for that and built a multi-billion-dollar industry and built buildings and edifices and support systems all across this country off of the backs of the HIV epidemic. They moved past that to marriage, and they successfully got that on the books and made same-sex marriage legal in this country. I was attacked when I was invited to speak by Minister Farrakhan in 2005 at the Million Man March because white gays wanted Keith Boykin to speak, and they were mad because they wanted him to speak for them because they had given his organization, which I won't mention right now, money to push gay marriage. They wanted him to do that for them on that platform and try to attack and diss me and minimize me because they figured I wasn't going to do that for them, and they were absolutely right. But the bottom line is that white gays were successfully pushing white gay marriage in this country. They were successful. They made a conscious effort to make transgender issues their next issue. So the reason you can't turn left or right without hearing about transgender issues, get your remote control out and turn the TV channel without hearing about transgender issues, jump up and down in your house without getting hit by a transgender lamp, or something transgender is going to come up, because they are powerful and omnipresent, and they make sure what their agenda is, because it's highly financed, is everywhere.
Now I'm gonna tell you something, Cleo.
So now, let me finish this real quick. Then I'm finished. The Black trans life focus that has been interrupting or put in place in some instances in Black communities like Baltimore, which is almost 7% Black. There's not no Black Lives Matters huge street painting in the middle of the street about Black lives, but there's one about trans lives. That's white power in blackface. That's white capacity, white people who have all these resources and pull and political power in blackface. And a lot of trans Black people who are so glad about being acknowledged after years of not being acknowledged even by their own community, that they jump on the board of this acknowledgement campaign. And unfortunately, I think has created some level of division between Black people who are scratching their head about all this transgender stuff based on 18 people becoming more important and more highlighted than the thousands of Black people who otherwise would have been murdered by cops in other situations.
I was just going to add on something, Cleo, because you tapped into something very important when you were talking about transgender rights being the next frontier, so to speak, for the white LGBT movement. One thing I want to point out, too, is that they have to use Black bodies as the vehicle. They cannot push this narrative. They cannot contrive this narrative just using white trans people and only speaking to white people. They can't pull that bullshit to their communities. They have to piggyback off of Black trauma, Black bodies, even George Floyd. They've jumped on that bandwagon in order to be able to use that as a vehicle and as the medium of getting their agenda passed. And it's time we stop allowing people to prey on us like parasites and use our trauma and our bodies and our oppression as a vehicle for their wealth, and they're extending their wealth and political power and presence in this country.
I wanted to point out two things. One, especially when you mentioned the transition to marriage being the agenda at the time, there's documented evidence and reports, if you just reach out and talk to the Black community who are even engaged in LGBTQ, of where Black individuals who were suffering from homelessness or HIV or any of the harms and violences that we have attributed that normally happens to individuals who identify LGBTQ or Black, when harm happened to these individuals and they sought lobby and they sought support and they sought resources from white individuals of the LGBTQ community, they were denied. They would not come and speak when a Black boy was put out of his home or he was murdered or harmed or whatever else because of his sexuality. They would not come to those rallies. They would not come to support that particular initiative or endeavor. They were not coming out to Black trans communities who've been here for however, like always been here, pretty much, have always been here, have always been engaging, but they would not come into these communities to seek out their particular resources they need and help. There was none of that occurring. And so we have to recognize that there is a real agenda that is happening, that this is now their particular push to fight, and we are the chess pieces that they can use to win this particular game. Two is, if you ever have the honor and privilege of speaking with a non-traumatized Black transgender individual, and a lot of them will come to the same agreement, but the way, similar to sexuality, the way Black individuals come to understand gender is so different. than how white individuals come to understand gender, which is why another reason why, as Krishan pointed out, they can't put this with their particular communities because white people, some of them are just pretending. Some of them are just saying any and every goddamn thing in order to portray their particular cause in order to give resources and funding. Black individuals have been dealing with the concept of gender since 1619 in this country. Every last one of us. And so there has to be a real reconciliation and talk inside intracommunally about what we can do to protect and save ourselves and not cause harm to each other, regardless of anything. There's always this push to call us quote unquote transphobic. And I'm like, you do know that we killed Tyrone simply because he stole $20, right? Like, what does that make us now? Like you are a part of a community that is traumatized, and you identifying in a separate identity does not erase the trauma. It does not make you immune to intracommunal crime. And the fact that you hope it does is anti-Black as hell.
Well, I want to point something out because Cleo said he wasn't going to mention a certain organization
another thing that
earlier today. Nathaniel.
Yes.
My brother.
Hi. I'm trying to say something.
Wait, hold your thought because Duke has used a term that I'm not sure everybody understands it yet, and we got to all understand it. He used the term intracommunal.
Yeah.
I want you all to understand that intracommunal means inside of your own community.
Mm-hmm.
White on white crime is intracommunal crime. So-called black on black crime, which is outnumbered by white on white crime, by the way, will be intra-group violence. And all groups have intra-group conflict. All groups. Black people hear black on black crime because of racism and white supremacy and the perpetual agenda to stigmatize being black in the society. But I want people to understand that when Duke says intra-communal, he means, and he is describing intra-community conflict, intra-people conflict. Nathaniel? I thought you were going to say something.
Well, another thing I want to add is yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, very, very well.
Well, another thing that I wanted to add is the media component, and because I've heard this, particularly from like a lot of Black people, Black women, people, like on my Facebook feed, Black trans people on my Facebook feed is how Black men don't care about Black, other groups of Black people because it's like every time something happens to they assume every time something happens to a Black man, they assume he's heterosexual. So it's like straight Black men don't care about different groups of Black people because it's like, people ride, when things happen to them and, it's all of the media. But I always emphasize that Black people don't own the media. And so whatever is put out there of us, when like something with George Floyd or anything, that's only one incident of thousands of incidents that happen every day across the country. And so it's like, since we don't own the media, we don't have the platform to show, what's happening, the violence is happening to Black women or other groups of Black people in the country by police officers or, or just anybody, from the powers that be. So I don't know. It's just this whole idea. I just can't stand it because it's like, I don't know. And it's like, unfortunately, we kind of do fall prey to, not really looking beyond everything we see in the media and investigating beyond it. And so,
that's a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the whole thing with the media and how people are really just thinking that somehow straight Black men control the media because people ride around them. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I'm glad you brought up the media, Nathaniel, because right before you came to us, I was about to bring up a brother named Baina El Amin, who I talk about him a lot because I wrote an article on him when this happened. And he's one example of the white LGBT machine, along with the media, devouring other Black homosexual men and labeling them as being heterosexual. Simply, and this just goes to show you that they are anti-Black through and through. Baina El Amin was the same gender-loving Black man who defended himself against two racist white gay men who attacked him in a restaurant, but he was labeled by white media as well as white LGBT media as being a brute, as being homophobic, all this stuff. They were talking about it was a hate crime. They were putting pressure on the city to press charges on him as a hate crime. The only reason New York didn't press hate crime charges on him is because he could prove that he was a homosexual. There was a so-called triple LGBT murder in Detroit, whereas this individual, a young man, was being accused of carrying out, which is a horrendous act, but he was being accused of carrying it out because he was so-called homophobic, when in fact it came out that he had participated in some sexual activity with the people who he killed beforehand. So how the hell does that make him heterosexual or homophobic when he's participating and engaging in this behavior? You see what I'm saying?
I tell you, Kashama, is what I brought up earlier, that Black people, especially Black men in this particular instance, have been dealing with this concept of gender for a very long time. And when you look like this, you do not get the space to be quote unquote fluid, to be quote unquote human, to be quote unquote in love with the same. You don't get the space to do that because you look a certain way, and therefore you are dehumanized as a result. We don't make space for that in our particular gender theories, concepts, and discussions, but it's absolutely a part of it.
Well, supposedly you all.
And I also want to say that when you think about hello?
I'm here. I was going to say something.
Hello?
Go on, Nathaniel.
I'm sorry.
Go on.
Oh, okay. I was just saying that if people don't believe, that there's, that the white gays profit off of this, like my question is always when I see, the Black Trans Lives Matters and murals in the street, or the Black Lives Matters murals in the street, I'm like, who's paying for all this paint? You know what I mean? Who's paying to get the street shut down? So, you know what I mean? So they can do this. It's not no, you know what I mean? Like, it ain't no Black people paying for this paint. You know what I mean? So that's just always like, where is this money coming from? And of course, we know where it's coming from, but not everybody's thinking about where this money is coming from to do this.
Well, before we start opening it up, though, go ahead.
The audience is asking you. About 3 people have asked you to speak up. So next time you speak, get closer to your mic or something so you can be understood.
But Cleo, before we start to open up, because I know you're probably going to want to do that soon. While we're on the subject of the media and co-opting, I think it's important that we point out Human Rights Coalition, and I'm going to call them out by name because this is a white organization. They're white as the day is long. They're so white they had to come up with a whole separate wing to handle Black issues. But yet now they are dominating the narrative as far as racism and pretending as if they've been dealing with race the whole time, and they haven't. The brother who was almost lynched in Indiana, it now appears that he's a member of his county's HRC. So now he's a civil rights activist. Now HRC is all over this. Now HRC has Corral on Twitter talking about standing up against racism. When, like I just pointed out, how Baina El Amin was railroaded. HRC said and did nothing. HRC said and did nothing when Ed Buck was doing his mad science experiments on Black people. HRC has been silent. But now when these Black dollars, they smell some Black money raining down. They see we all in the streets talking about reparations and all kind of crazy stuff.
Not only is it an issue of smelling money, it's an issue of controlling the narrative.
That too.
Issue of making sure that what occurs is watered down, so there is no transformation of power or no redistribution of power in this country, and putting a face on this whole thing that makes it look like they really care and that change is gonna come. HRC has been racist for so long. I used to call them the Human Rights Caucasians. That's what I said the C stood for. And y'all too young to remember Jeffrey Dahmer. But when Jeffrey Dahmer was murdering and killing Black men for breakfast and lunch, white gays didn't come out for that either. There's many incidences. But one thing I think is important to underscore here is that we live in I want to reiterate what Roger said. Roger just mentioned that for a long time, HRC didn't defend transgender people. But somebody in that group, some of that was inspired by Caitlyn Jenner, believe it or not, who's a white supremacist, by the way. But they have decided to change course and push transgender issues in a very powerful way. But I want to mention before we moved on that we're living in an era now that lots of people, including folks who seem to have some level of intelligence, where we're supposed to be in this great opportunity moment of changing racism and voting Biden in to end the wrath of racism compared to Trump. And there's white people, including Delta Airlines and Campbell Soup and stuff, talking about it's important to deal with racial injustice. And the whole mantra about focusing on racial injustice is all over the place now. But the issues that we're addressing in this conversation right now are not being addressed in terms of the intrinsic, omnipresent presence of normalized white supremacy that is not actually being dealt with or deconstructed. There is no conversation about getting rid of the white supremacy mythology that started in this country with Manifest Destiny and goes all the way back to Alexander the Great. People don't realize that states called Alexandria, etc., in this country are named after Alexander the Great, who's one of the ancient founders of the myth of white supremacy. But my point is that we have a lot of unpacking to do, people, if we're really going to do some work around deconstructing and eliminating white supremacy mythology and how it contaminates the quality of life for Black people. And I want to reiterate something that both Duke and Kashama mentioned in terms of transgender people who've gone so long without being seen and acknowledged on all sides. I'm talking about Black people now. I ain't talking about gender, Caitlyn Jenner, and the like. I'm talking about Black people who have been enjoying this attention, who are trans, and have allowed themselves to get used. All 18 of them who've been murdered, compared to the thousands of Black people who've been murdered. I don't say 18 to be dismissive. I say it to be scientific regarding real numbers and what an epidemic looks like. I care about transgender people being murdered. I care about transgender people on the streets. I care about transgender people being disheveled. I see them all the time in this community, and they need support and affirmation, but not in ways that derail larger Black discussions around saving Black life. We can't allow white folks to derail us, and we can't allow ourselves to get involved in these entanglements, which are built off of white agendas. There'll be more discussion about how indeed we do that, but we've already broken down that when it came to Ed Buck and et cetera, they weren't there, and they're not even culturally prepared or psychologically prepared to really be there for Black people. What they are prepared for is to use Black people and to buy and pimp Black people, and to get Black people who they are comfortable with to be the spokespersons for Black issues because they can control them or buy them. So let's be real clear about what's really going on here regarding power, the optics, and manipulation. Well, before we go on to the next topic, I wonder if you guys had any final comments on it. And if people want to join this conversation and be part of the video feed and bring in their perspective, that's fine too. In about 10 minutes or less, we're going to go to the comments, and there's lots of them, and read what you have to say. But we want your voices in this conversation.
The only thing I wanted to add is that I believe it was a sister on Twitter who said it, but she said a lot of these organizations are adopting language that quote unquote affirms Black people as if Black people just came out yesterday. And I just really want to uplift that particular message and perspective.
Okay.
Like Black people just came out 24 hours ago. The way everybody's like, oh, protect Black people, uplift. It's a game, y'all.
I think I mentioned, I did mention I made a little small videotape. I was somewhere the other day, and I had my Value Black People T-shirt on, and this white man volunteered to come over my face and said, "You should put the word recognize on that T-shirt." And I'm like, "The T-shirt is fine. I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to do with this T-shirt." Well, you should put recognize on it because white people are recognizing Black lives. And I said to him, with all the respect that I could, because I don't believe in feeding into conflict, I said, this shirt ain't for you. It's not about your recognition. It's not about whether you recognize anything or not. This shirt is for black folks. And this shirt is about black people valuing black people, because white folks have interrupted that logical reaction that black people should have. So it's just interesting what you said. You need to recognize this shirt is for black folks.
Cleo, what you say to him again about this is what the shirt is doing what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, it's supposed to value black people. It's not this shirt ain't for white folks. But anyway.
Oh man.
But hey,
now before we move on, I'm so enamored with this word entanglement, because we came up with it kind of tongue in cheek, but God is so perfect. Like Jada, some 2020 man is the planets are aligning. Jada was on time with that concept, because there's a lot of stuff that we're calling different things. We're calling it allyship. We're calling it intersectionalism. We call it all, and there's a bunch of entanglements we have. And we gotta iron a lot of this stuff up. We gotta iron it out. And figure out how to focus on the black agenda, man.
Yes, we gotta focus on a black agenda, an uncompromised, uncontaminated black agenda that actually strategically has components in it that's going to transform things, instead of creating this interracial masturbation fest that's getting ready to occur. That's not going to lead black people nowhere but into a deeper accommodationism of white supremacy. Now, our final topic was, and we've kind of already covered it to an extent, was the Jewish attack on Minister Farrakhan, which should include Facebook and powerful social media interfaces that won't allow Farrakhan to be heard in these social mediums. The people who are in this room right here who recommended that be part of our discussion, you want to give us a narrative to contextualize why this is part of the Black entanglements and the agenda to co-opt, slander, and derail Black liberation?
Oh man, one day we need to do a workshop on Farrakhan to really go into that. But honestly, I look at Farrakhan as being central to the whole conversation around Nick Cannon, Deshaun, all of them. I think Farrakhan is so central to this because he was, I think, the first pariah or the first focus of this how do you say, this narrative from Jewish people in regards to Black, or a particularly Black brand of anti-Semitism. And I think we went over some of the other stuff that went down during the 80s and early 90s that also led to that narrative. But yeah, Farrakhan he's turned into the litmus test for whether white power accepts you or not, whether you condone or condemn Farrakhan. That's how they know whether they can F with you or not. And honestly, I believe that that's the root of Nick Cannon. I think, of course, his actions and what he was doing, I think that coupled with Farrakhan's presence, he just will not go away. He just will not disappear. Farrakhan made reference to a poisoning that he said happened recently to him. I don't know if anybody watched his 4th of July speech. He was noticeably frail and shaking and stuff. And yeah, he's old, but he came out his mouth and said that there was an attempt on his life. Farrakhan is that thorn in white power side that just won't go away. Whereas everything is faded, he's still here.
Well, I'd be glad when you bring in some younger people to be next to him to make sure his leadership and legacy is consistent. I get concerned when the same brother is there forever and not, like, that's why you brothers are here, because I want to make sure that there's younger people still around to keep the work going, because I ain't gonna be here forever. But anyway, I could be real quick with this, Duke. I want people to understand why there's these frictions sometimes between Jews and Blacks, and what I'm getting ready to tell you gets beyond all three of y'all even being on the planet. The New York Times, funded by the Jewish Defense League, once put a full-page ad in their newspaper that was there to prove that Farrakhan was anti-Semitic. and they put 2 quotes by Farrakhan on this full-page ad, which is very expensive in the New York Times. I forgot the first quote, but the second quote from Farrakhan was, "Jews are not the chosen people." And to get people mad at Farrakhan, or to underscore the contempt they have for him because of his anti-Semitism, they did something very, very disingenuous and dishonest. And it seems to me, if you're really serious about liberty and justice and decency, you wouldn't do this. They put a quote from Farrakhan, which was accurate, where he said, "Jews are not the chosen people." Well, they didn't put the whole quote. He said Jews are not the chosen people, and Black people and everybody else was just as important as Jews. So why should they be the chosen people? That's what he said, but they didn't put that part in there. They were being manipulative and deceptive. And they also, the quotes were, "Hitler was a great leader, and Jews are not the chosen people." This was put in a full-page ad in the New York Times. Now, Farrakhan did not praise Hitler. He don't like Hitler. He hates Hitler. He sees Hitler as a monster white supremacist on steroids. And they took his comments out of context because they didn't say the whole thing that he said. He also talked about what a low-down evil devil Hitler was. But he said that Hitler was effective. He killed 6 million Jews. That's pretty effective. That's not a good thing. I mean, we're not saying that's good.
White power was effective at doing what they did to us. Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover was a great leader and very, very effective. He murdered. He created consequences that led to the easier murder of Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
Edgar Evers got compromised Marcus Garvey, created COINTELPRO. He was very, very effective.
J. Edgar Hoover was bad.
But he was a low down dirty dog who also was a homosexual too. So I mean, these are just facts. Nobody's saying that we love J. Edgar Hoover when we say he was an effective leader. He was effective. Anyway, that's what Farrakhan meant. The point in all this is saying that they took his words out of context, which is unprincipled, to get people to hate him. But the bottom line is, this is supposed to be a free country, and reason that what's that man's name? The reason that Arsenio Hall show, one of the reasons the Arsenio Hall show, y'all might be too young to know about that too, was canceled was because he practiced freedom of speech and he allowed Farrakhan to be on his show. So Jews will make sure their image is protected. And I wish Black people did the same thing and stop allowing ourselves to be called the N-word and allowing others to call us the N-word and saying, no, you can't do it. That's a whole nother show, but I'm planting that seed.
Well, go ahead, Cleve. Go ahead, Duke. I'm sorry.
I wanted to know, is there time for me to play a 2-minute, 43-second clip? I can share my screen. And I want to do this. It's of Farrakhan in an interview with Mr. Wallace. And it's one of my favorite moments ever. And mind you, I've never, when I was young, I was never a fan of Farrakhan because I was like, he's homophobic, he's evil, and blah, blah, blah. But I never took the time to recognize people where they were or where they're at, and recognize that sometimes you don't agree with everything that someone says, but that doesn't mean that you throw them away either. But there's this really powerful clip of perspective that Farrakhan stated in this interview with Mr. Wallace, and I want to share it with you all if y'all haven't seen it.
I'm not sure whether I've seen it or not.
I'm sure you have.
I'd like to see it. But I do want to introduce an important aspect too in the criticism of Farrakhan, and this actually gets very it gets quite deep and political or geopolitical. I mentioned earlier that those who criticize Israel are often labeled anti-Semitic. Farrakhan is a staunch critic of the country of Israel and the treatment of Palestinian people. The treatment of brown Arabs there, as well as the treatment of Black immigrants in that country. And if you understand why Israel is such a sensitive topic here in the U.S., is not only because it is a safe haven for Jewish people, but it's also a powerful U.S. ally in the Middle East, in a area that is dominated by Muslim countries who do not like the U.S. So the fact that Farrakhan stands in solidarity with Palestine and is an open and vocal critic of Zionism, as what is known as, or the idea that Israel has the right to exist at the expense of Palestinian people. Anyone who does that, who places himself in that position, will be demonized by media. It happened to Mark Lamont Hill recently as well.
Yep.
I'm gonna play the clip.
Can we get some volume?
Yeah.
I don't think Israel.
Let's see. I have it at max at
It
the
might
moment.
not be the best place.
Uh-oh. Well, we're going to have to refer it to our listeners because it ain't working.
Okay. All right. So we'll just drop it in the chat in the comments. I had the direct
In the
link.
email.
Or
Yeah, we can do that too. Yep. Join our email listers.
We
yeah,
got brother Barry Moten from BMX DC. He said he would like to come on as well and talk.
Does he have the link?
You got the link, Barry?
Please put the link up, Adam, so people can use it to call in. Sorry we couldn't play the clip, you all. We gotta work on that type of thing. The clips that do come up would be really powerful and very helpful to our conversation. And I remember last time we had a difficult time with these clips, but we're going to have to fix that because these narratives are very important.
I like the fact that this platform allows all of us to screen share. What?
Adam, could we get the link up for people who want to join?
He just put it in.
Barry, it's on the Facebook page. Or where is it, Kasham?
In the chat.
Oh, okay. I see it in the chat, but I don't know if it's on.
Okay.
I don't know if it's on the Facebook page, which is where Barry is. Can we put this link on my page, Adam? Yes, Mr. Williams, we're getting ready to put the link on my page, and on the Black Men's Exchange page, so you can join us. Thank you, Lowell. He said it's there. Join us on screen, folks. We're waiting for people to. I see several people asking to join. Oh, there. Okay, there. Hey, Barry.
Hey, how are y'all?
Doing well. Yeah.
Good. I'm good. Yeah. So, I wanted to kind of comment a little bit on the Farrakhan thing. I had posted something on Facebook. Just a small clip of Farrakhan talking about the context of using the N-word and what, and how detrimental it has been to the Black community. And I received a lot of backlash from certain people on Facebook a lot of them that I barely even know. And I didn't see anything that was kind of based in fact. And so then it just made me start to think, like, are you just rationalizing like your dysfunction, or you know what I mean? Like, or is there some actual truth that you even bring up, but I didn't notice any of it.
Well, what exactly are they saying? Is it?
It was a combination of things. One person said something to the effect of, well, a bunch of different people and a bunch of different ethnic groups use racial epithets and a bunch of different ethnic groups use the racial epithets that were used against them. They use that and they've reclaimed it as their own. But the person that said that could not provide
Could not name a particular community or culture that does it, right?
Right. And I think maybe they did, like maybe one, but I've never heard that, and it wasn't very prominent. The groups use the racial epithets that were used against them. They use that and they've reclaimed it as their own. But the person that said that could not provide
could not name a particular community or culture that does it, right?
Right. And I think maybe they did, like I don't know what just happened, but
I see you, but I don't know what happened either.
Yeah.
But finish.
Well, yeah, that was pretty much all I was okay. Really saying.
And you also mentioned in the room earlier about some revelations that apparently were something that was revelatory for you regarding the trans conversation. Do you remember that? And I want you to mention that, but I want to go back to your previous thing just to keep the flow going, and let you know that we have addressed that, and we're going to address that more. The N-word fixation that white people have successfully imposed into our consciousness. You're never going to get a rational, truth-based response to people who use the word, even when they say reclaim it. Particularly if you ask them, where's the fruit? I mean, where's the what's the cliche? Where's the I forgot the cliche, but the beef. I say, where's the beef? Where's the beef?
Right.
You're having this great result because you reclaimed it. Ask them where it is. Ask them how come. Ask them why do groups who don't do that do better than black people,
right?
Particularly, including when it comes to being unified, because it's difficult to psychologically focus on unification on a consistent basis when a white person's insult is part of your psyche.
Right.
But anyway, we could go on for that one, but I'm just giving you some suggestions on how you could counter that madness. But you already said they had no response to your questions, right? Because we're hypnotized. It's kind of like, you've ever met a woman or a man who were in a bad relationship and they got a black eye and they still talk, but I love him. You know what I'm saying? That's our relationship to the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm using that word. I know that word. I'm familiar with it. Like you're familiar with the fist of your domestic violator.
Mm-hmm.
We have to learn to, purge and get out of white supremacist norms so we can be psychologically prepared to unify. But again, that's a whole other subject. It's definitely a derailment, and it's definitely a black entanglement of whiteness, but it's so acculturated into black norms that we think it's black. And we talking about we're gonna reclaim it. You can't reclaim something that ain't yours. The N-word ain't yours.
Yeah.
And one thing I say to them too, I say, what if I called you a stupid MF? Would you claim it just to stop it from being painful?
Right.
Get a stupid MF T-shirt.
Right.
Stupid MF power. Because you want to recreate it. No, you wouldn't recreate that insult. Just because of whiteness that we are being that psychologically out of balance.
It's another thing too, Cleo. It's a fact that we are used to not being intentional with so much. We're used to being guided by our subconscious oppressive, trauma, to where, because that all that is a lie anyway. As far as reclaiming, that was made up sometime around the 90s, and black people have been saying the N-word for decades. They just made it up to try to rationalize. When people finally started calling it out and saying, "Why are we doing this?" People had to come up with something and say, "Well, hey, we've reclaimed it."
Yeah.
No, it's not. That's not what was done. Nobody set out and intentionally said, "I'm going to reclaim that word," even though the master whipping me and beating me and calling me this word. I'm gonna reclaim it for myself, and I'm gonna call my children this. Nobody consciously said that.
Especially when I'm pissed off about children, I'm going to call them this.
Right.
Yeah.
But real quickly, because the time.
Avid Williams, we got another person.
I see him, and I want to make sure he has his time, as Maxine Waters would say. Okay. But Barry mentioned that in the chat room about a revelation that he had regarding the trans conversation. And if he can remember that, I'd like him to share it.
Yeah. So basically, the part where you were really contextualizing black trans people's relationship to blackness and sort of running to whiteness for this sort of acceptance and the context in which that sort of exists. I thought that was really powerful because I have a lot of trans friends, and I've recognized that their approach many times to black issues seems very layered, complex, and complicated. And I could never really put my finger on exactly what it was that I was feeling, but I could definitely feel a sense of even defensiveness and animosity towards
Black folks.
particular black folks in the community, but I could never really contextualize it in that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks.
You don't have to go nowhere if you don't want to, but we do want to hear from Mr. Williams. What's up, A?
Good evening. Good evening. This is an amazing platform. There's so much I wanted to comment on, but one thing I wanted to comment on is the fact that as I said in my comments, I think Nick Cannon brought a lot to his platform, but I think that I don't know that he was guided in the wokeness and in the richness of his knowledge, and I don't think he realized the level of venom that he was going to be met with. You know, it's unfortunate because I don't feel that he. I think his only crime was being zealous. I think his only crime was being unguided. You know, and so like I shared from the ISIS papers that I've read from Dr. Welsing all the way through to Amos Wilson and John Henry Clark, there is truth in that. And I think those that know of the truth fear it and want to smart it out. It's unfortunate because, again, in my spirit, and I can be wrong, I think Nick Cannon feels that we, the collective, turned on him. And again, that's not accurate. I think some of us did because again, I think the apology made him look like he was running with his head in his tail. But, you know, when you're aware of the level of that reside in this earth, you know, I don't know if there's somebody at his door with a gun. You know, I don't know. You know, and I don't know if it's fair for someone to say that he backpedaled with the apology because, again, we don't know. I mean, look at Jada and Will, who seems to be everyone's superhero now. You know, I mean, and I'm not going to tell you, hey, I'm not going to touch you, right?
He did give us his word now.
So it's like you say to yourself, well, wait, okay, you know, these are people, you know, apparently unless they, you know, they have to put their clothes on the same way we do, right? So it's like, well, how different from us are they? You know, and then, you know, so much that I want to share. It's just that I wanted to mention that situation with Nick Cannon because you have someone like him who, again, like I feel he attempted to do something with, you know, completing the Dr. Sebi bio I think he was working on, you know, all of this richness that I believe the generations need. And I appreciate Dr. Cleo when he mentions the intergenerational thing. There are many things that has happened with Farrakhan where so many people now have no idea. You know, Farrakhan has laid a mighty path for himself. And I don't think that he's shying away from it, but in fact, he is aware of the evils of the world. He is aware of the fact that, if I close my eyes a little too long, somebody's gonna sneak up behind me, no matter how much NOI is surrounding me. You know, so yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that.
We keep falling into the trap of not valuing Black people. And an example of that, beyond of how we treated Nick Cannon, but there's this soul singer from Canada named Daniel Caesar. He sings good music. This brother can sing down, okay? But he, like most Black people, was enamored with whiteness. And he made an attempt to defend a white woman who was engaging in racism and in the same process decided to talk down on Black people, saying that Black people need to just get over racism or needs to stop doing some things, need to stop putting himself as a victim and all these other things. So he was acting a damn fool. And he absolutely deserved critique. However, the way the critique came was much different than approaching him as far as him being wrong in his ideology. The way Black Twitter and the way that the larger Black community was responding to him was talking about his looks, was talking about
Mhm.
Literally just the way he looked. And this
Yeah.
particular brother, if you ever look him up, he's not what you call conventionally attractive by European standards. He has mostly African features. He's
Yeah.
very dark. He has a very big nose. He has big
Yeah.
lips. And what happens when you treat Black individuals this way, regardless of their perspective, is you're not welcoming them in to the
Right.
larger context. They don't see a community that they should
Right.
quote unquote be a part of because you're not treating them like a communal member.
Right.
There's ways to call out and address each other that does not result in us traumatizing each other in the process.
I'm familiar with Daniel Caesar. I happen to be a music teacher and an opera singer, so I have to stay kind of awoke.
And it hurts, man, because that brother can sing. I'm
yeah,
like,
I have to. But I think it's interesting that you bring him up because his criticism reminded me, shamefully enough, of the infamous criticism that Bill Cosby said about us. And it was kind of out of, it was kind of, as Dr. Cleo was shaking his head, it was kind of like, whoa, Bill, like, you from Southside Philadelphia, what happened? And so again, unfortunately, he was reminded, you're not that far from the plantation. You know, you're not that exempt. You have a doctorate, yes. Your show was the #1 show that saved NBC, yes. You had a spinoff, yes, but you are still what we deem as untouchable, or a Black man, or a nigger, whatever that is. And it's interesting that you brought up Daniel Caesar, because I find as the term cultural appropriation, if you will, through the arts. Again, I don't want to say white America, but that thing always seems to get within our folds.
White America seems to keep getting inside of our. I don't think for that. We gonna work through that.
It's crazy because it's crazy because, you know, my grandmother died 5 years ago and she was 96, and so I remember the gleam in her eyes when she got dressed just to go across the street to vote for Obama. I said to myself, now there's such a special unity that I believe she feels is going to come. I feel she feels, okay, I live to see the day we got a Black president. As you can imagine, I didn't even want to go to that conversation with her. But the same breath is like, where is the unity? You know, I think Black Lives Matter, as Farrakhan said, started off in a very germane, a very pure, very pious position. And then, you know, Soros and whoever got in the way of it and steered it. And it's interesting because I think white America, if you will, the world knows if they allow Black men and women to unite. And I said allow, unfortunately, because somehow or another we've not, as a collective, been able to fight against those forces. But if we were given the chance to unite, you know, it would be sort of a reckoning day. You know, yeah.
Well, I want to say, because this is the most important thing to me, that we can unite. We can do it at any moment if we go on and do it. We can. We have the power. We have so much power in our hands.
I believe you.
We have never been so resourceful. Has access to technology. Rich in terms of that many Black millionaires. We have a lot. We have a lot of everything but cohesion.
Okay.
When we get the Black cohesion along with this other stuff that we have, we will be no joke. There's a reason why Biden and all these people running after Black votes and trying to make sure that Black people are in the mix, because we have power, but we don't have self-love or self-clarity because of the perpetual interruption of that phenomenon. And part of our work as an organization is to restore us back to Black clarity, Black self-love, of capacity to decode where we live so we can stop falling for the okie doke and learn to value Black people as a norm.
Well,
and on levels.
I'm sorry. I want to ask you, because in my time of cognitions, the recent riots and the recent uprisings, as far as I'm concerned, was the most unified and the most, you know, as you said, most cohesive signs of it. Would you say these recent riots was successful or as successful as the 60s, or was it just different and better in 60s, 70s?
Oh boy, you would ask me that.
Well, but I'll tell you why, because, you know, I speak to students. I teach high school students, and so they understand the power of numbers. You know, from gangs, from fights. You know, they understand. So, you know, as they're out there marching now, I'm like, well, wait, we ain't the first to be born. You know what I'm saying? And I think, you know, again, I could be wrong. I think we're reaping the benefits from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But I'm saying to myself, like you just said, if we got ourselves together, and I'm like, well, wait, I thought we was together here. I know they was together in the 60s, 70s. Like, what were we missing?
You asked this question at 9:00 p.m.
My bad. I apologize. My bad. I apologize. I can put a pin in it. I can do a sidebar. It's cool. I'm sharing it though.
It's a very important question, and I only can answer it. And you brothers also, obviously invited to bring your spin on it. But if we're not, Neely Fuller once said, and probably is still saying, if you don't understand white supremacy, you don't understand nothing.
Got it.
And one thing that the myth of white supremacy has is resilience and the capacity to recreate itself so it cannot be recognized for what it is, so it can stay in power. For example, we hear these conversations about white silence is bad, and we have white people saying white silence is bad, and and Black Lives Matter. But what's not being critiqued is that it's psychologically damaging for Black people to even feel like they have to ask white people to matter. Right. True. Just thinking that that's what we have to do is from a place of weakness and reinforces the myth of their superiority. I don't care what they think. I don't care if I matter to white people or not. Like I told the white gentleman who said, you need to change that because we're recognizing you. What you recognize is that's fine, and I hope it works somewhere on the planet. But it ain't got nothing to do with what I'm doing over here. Right. So my point to you in a outline is that I don't think what's going on, including these protests, is powerful enough. I think it wasn't for COVID-19 and people feeling socially restricted that they were rebelling against and weren't used to, we wouldn't have been out there like that. I think what we've recognized is a perfect storm between having a blatant white supremacist as the president of the United States, as opposed to a passive-aggressive white supremacist like Joe Biden, but a straight-up white supremacist in the White House like Trump, who's just being straight up with his stuff, along with COVID-19, along with social distancing, along with the shock and the fear of such a strange social interruption. And white people see, in the midst of this interruption and all of this lack of clarity around jobs, around survival, when George Floyd got murdered on videotape, white people did not want to be associated with that because they already were feeling unsure about the environment because of all kinds of capitalist, environmental, and social situations. So they feel, look, we're going to have to join and act like we down for this. Right. But like I asked the white folks that I asked questions to in another meeting, I said, didn't Tamir Rice's murder, wasn't enough? When Philando Castile was bloodied and murdered on Facebook Live with a little girl in the back seat screaming and hollering with his blood on her, and we watched him die next to his horrified girlfriend, that wasn't enough. When Trayvon Martin was getting Skittles and tea and minding his own business, walking home, and then was suddenly murdered by a tracker. Why George Floyd? When Marion Turner had gasoline poured on her pregnant body and was stripped naked and burned alive and screaming, hollering, you white folks didn't. What's up? This is all part of a unusual circumstance, which with COVID-19 at the core of it, that's causing all this behavior publicly. You might remember that it was white folks who initially rebelled against having to be socially controlled. They were like, wait a minute.
In Seattle, Washington, they actually the street.
Those are the ones who got some coverage. There were some other white folks other places too. So this whole coming in the street stuff is a good angle in which to be able to be out on the street like you want to be. But getting to the bottom line, white supremacy dangers and the lethalness of it and its omnipresence and its pure contamination of all of our psyche cannot be resolved by marching in the street with white folks.
Period.
Social and structural change is something that has to occur that's not depending on Joe Biden to be president. It has to be bigger than that and go beyond that and be more comprehensive than that and deals with and deals with a lot of stuff that we don't have time to get into, but it's been all superficial, and superficial stuff don't change nothing. But the the top layer of the optics.
Mhm.
Because we've been in the street before. And
Right.
we and the body count, I'm gonna close this long thing that you provoked me to get in with this. The black body count at the risk of, the black body count resulting from white supremacist norms has not lowered in a major way since slavery.
Thank you.
So when the body count lowers, when black people can look into all the social norms of media, etc., and politics and see themselves, loving themselves, affirming themselves, having autonomy as black people, and not being unsafe to love yourself, which is what Nick Cannon ran into, when it becomes a norm to just be powerful and black in this society and be in a relationship with black people and to not be dangerous to call out white supremacy or to love black people and have power, then we have a new day. But what's going on right now ain't speaking to that kind of change. White folks running around in the street talking about Black Lives Matter. It's just a mantra. And as far as I'm concerned, it has the value of a fashion statement. That's my opinion. You asked. I was trying to go to something else, and but that's just.
Brother Williams, I tried to send you a friend request when I heard that you are a musician. I wanted to find your links and stuff, but it appears that you must have so many friends, brother, that you can't get any more people added.
No, that's not me.
How do we follow you? How do we find you?
I got you. I'll put you on. What it is honestly, it's a byproduct of students liking you. So you come home one day, you see a bunch of friend requests from the students because they found you online. So I'm like, gotta change my name. So you know what I'm saying? I love y'all. Let me get the link. I'll get it for you. Not a problem.
All right, well, just send it to me online on Facebook.
Got it.
And thanks for being here, Avid. How you said Avid?
Avid.
Okay, I'm looking at it.
Like David, no D.
Avid in the alter ego is spelled backwards, but I'll let y'all figure that out.
Oh, of course. Right.
My students always every new student, yo, word? It's like that word?
Okay, well, excuse us. We're not all able. But okay.
Thank you very much for the honor. It was cool.
You're welcome, brother.
Also, going forward, Ava, because I saw your comments was coming up in a different lineup in chat. If you just go to the comments section under the video, you can see everything and be there because you were sending you was in the direct messaging. That's why no worries. But we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
I hope some women call one of these days. We love hearing from our sisters. We had a lot of them on about 4 weeks ago, but we want to hear from our sisters even more. But now it's 9:16 p.m. and we're going to prepare to wind down. So we need now that somebody's bursting to come on the scene real quick, which means within the next few seconds, we're preparing to get final commentary from Duke and Kashama Sankofa. Then I'm going to say some stuff, and we're going to be out. All right.
I just want to say that I want to quote Sonia Sanchez, one of my favorite quotes, but she said the number one killer is gossip. And Sonia Sanchez was is a poet who was active during the civil rights movement and a key figure for the Black arts movement. And I just want people to think about that going forward, especially with the things that Brother Avid brought up. I would like for a future video for us to just talk about more about movements and what happened to them and really going in depth to things like COINTELPRO and what that meant for Black people and repercussions because of things like that. That's it.
I just want you all to take from this broadcast, if you don't take anything, is to beware of these entanglements and learn how to recognize them and stay out of entanglements. Basically, let's stay clear, let's stay focused, let's be intentional, with everything that we do. And when that happens, people come trying to tangle you up in some BS, you be like, whoa, that ain't about Black liberation. That's an entanglement. Thank you, Sister Jada, for giving us that word from on high.
Thank you, Kashama. Thank you, Duke. I must let you all know that I have no idea what you're talking about when you mentioned Jada. I don't know. And I'm not trying to find out right now either, but I really don't know what's happening there. I know there's been talk and whispers, but I don't know the details, and so I don't know. But I want to reiterate to our audience that, or finally state that we see your questions, we see your commentary. There's a lot of them tonight. We plan on responding, if not tonight, later, to everything, particularly any questions that you have. I can't see what's on Facebook, but I can see what's on the interface that we use to do this show, and we will be answering some of your questions. But also, we want to reiterate the importance of you coming on the broadcast. You can even do it without your picture. If you're concerned about your picture, you can just keep your face off and still talk like Nathaniel does whenever he's around. But I want to close by saying that one of the more sensitive issues that we might have discussed tonight might have been the Black trans issue, because as opposed to jumping on the Black trans lives matter most, or matter in particular wagon, some of us, and me, I can speak for myself, believe that all Black life should matter explicitly, and we should find ways to build bridges between each other and not allow white folks and their agendas to tear us apart or divide us. Mm-hmm. And I understand, trans sisters and brothers, how you have felt oppressed by your own community. I'm talking about other same-gender loving people, by the way, because a lot of same-gender loving men and women are uncomfortable with trans people, and people don't know that. They think it's the so-called allegedly heterosexual people. But this, like David Chappelle said in his skit, that you're on the outside of the car sometimes because this community pushes you outside of the car. And they just added the T to LGBTQ recently because of the discrimination against this community within this community. And that's forgotten when when allegedly heterosexual men are blamed for everything. We're just buying into an anti-Black narrative that we need to take a second look at. But I want to mention in closing that I think it's great that people are attending to issues relevant to folks who are being murdered in our community, including trans people. But I'm not buying into the epidemic compared to everybody else Black. There's thousands of Black people, men and women, et cetera, who are being murdered every year, who need to be all included in the conversation about Black Lives Matters and Black people mattering. But I shouldn't even have mentioned the Black Lives Matters mantra, because I'm not with that whole thing. I have a whole perspective on that, which I won't get into tonight. But we need to value Black people and advocate for Black people. And as Kashama said, not keep allowing ourselves to be distracted and entangled in other agendas that keep us divided. Thank you for checking us out and being a part. And thank you, Kashama and Duke, for what you always do. And thanks to the hundreds of you who came in and came out to the discussion, and people like Yemi and Deshaun and Lowell and Lawrence and so many of you, Bakari, Terry, Marvin, Bachar, Utah Executive Kuko, Aaron McIntyre, Dion Floyd, and the many of you who joined the conversation and came and watched and allowed us to feed you tonight. We appreciate your presence. Thanks so much. And we're going to let Kashama give the final word since he started us off. He probably like, what the hell? But anyway, he can handle it.
I gave my final word. Stay out of these entanglements.
No, I mean the final word for all of us for the night.
Okay, so I now listen, this is not me shirking responsibility, but Duke traditionally does this thing where he tells us how to value Black people and love Black people, and he remembers it very well.
Yes, he does.
I think it's great. I think he should do that right now.
So let's repeat after Brother Duke.
I'm having connection issues once again. Love Black people.
Love Black people.
Love all people.
Love all people.
But especially love Black people.
But especially love Black people.
Especially love Black people.
It's been so long.
Wow, I know.
Because I am Black.
Because I am Black.
Because I am a Black person. And we are worthy of all that is good, has been created and done.
We are worthy of all that's been good, created, and done.
self-love,
self-love,
real power,
real power,
respect
and respect.
are my rewards to myself
Are my rewards to myself
and to my community.
and to my community.
Together we say,
Together we say,
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe.
y'all. Good night.
Peace, y'all.
Good night.